I'm at the airport, Dublin Airport, about to board a plane to JFK, New York City, for an antique fair that we're going to be doing at the Metropolitan Pavilion. Hello and welcome to our Gem Pursuit. My name is Alyce, and today I'm taking you on a solo, magical and mysterious pursuit through the world of antique and vintage jewellery. I have finally gotten rid of Matthew. Just kidding. He'll be back next week. I'm here alone this week to tell you about my recent trip to New York for an antiques fair with some of Courtville's top pieces. While on the trip, myself and Darcy, who works in the shop, got to visit the exhibit, a musical celebrating one of the most prestigious Art Deco artists of all time. I'll be taking you through the fascinating story of this artist and the incredible pieces of hers that we got to see on our travels. Let's do it. So to begin, we're going to start with the background of this fabulous artist. And of course, her name is synonymous with the art in which she created and has for a long time lived on the fringes of pop culture. Her name is Tamara Lempicka, or Tamara de Lempicka. She, of course, wasn't born with this particular name. She was born in Warsaw. At the time, it was considered Russian territory. And she was brought up in quite unusual circumstances for the time, as she was born in 1898 to Russian, Polish, Jewish parents. So quite turbulent times for her as a child, where she originally attended boarding school in Switzerland whilst her parents were working, her mum a socialite and her father a lawyer. So her childhood was considered, I would say, quite upper class. And as she continued to grow up, her parents in 1912 then divorced, and this had a huge impact on her life. We see from her childhood into her adolescence is where she starts to gain a love for artwork. In particular, her parents' divorce in 1912 meant that she was then had to either choose a parent to live with, and her parents decided to actually send her to an aunt's house in St. Petersburg. And this is really where her life began to change. Before she moved there, she actually went on a vacation with her grandmother to Italy and fell in love with the Renaissance paintings of the 16th century, including an art movement that happened during that time, which was called Mannerism. And you can see that it really has a huge impact on her artwork later on in her life. But this is where her love for artwork started to grow. But because she had moved into the upper class circles of St. Petersburg, she began to become a little bit of a socialite herself. And by the time she was in her late teens, as a teenager, she met and married Tamara de Lempicka in 1916 in Russia. So this is where her life really started to change, as Lempicka was part of the aristocratic circles. So she began to live a sort of champagne lifestyle just before the Russian Revolution. So this is in 1916. By 1917, she's actually facing the Russian Revolution. So her husband is taken by the Bolsheviks and arrested. And this is where we kind of get to see a little bit more of her personality, as I would consider her quite tenacious, very much someone who takes their fate into their own hands. And even as a teenager at this stage and a newlywed, we can see this kind of heroine starting to take charge. It was during the time of her husband's arrest that she endeared herself to a Swedish aristocrat who was able to help her, or a Swedish consul. She was able to be quite resourceful during this time and barter her husband's release by giving her favors to the Swedish consul. Now, if you do have the chance to go to New York and see this incredible play, which is about her life, her Broadway musical show called Lempicka, it does kind of show that she used jewellery in particular to try and barter her husband's safe return to her. And then it goes on to make a statement that she actually used her body or sexual favors to try and get her husband out of prison. Now, I've done my own research on this and I can neither say yay or nay to those particular facts. So I just wanted to mention them. But I do want to kind of reiterate that during the time of the Russian Revolution, it was her particular way of life and her husband's way of life would have been considered enemy number one, specifically to the Bolsheviks and what their political agenda was. So it would have been very, very difficult to secure the release of anybody who was taken to those particular prisons. So I can imagine that it would have taken quite a lot of resourcefulness, as I said before, to try and have him released, using whatever methods were necessary to do so, because the alternative was death. So I can imagine she would have used any avenue to get him out. After he was released, they sold everything that they could in the time that they had and then fled to Paris by the way of Copenhagen and London. So a very long journey, and also leaving a lot of their monetary wealth and lifestyle behind. And of course, this particular shift, as you can imagine, Paris at the time was just bursting with color, with artists, with the Art Nouveau kind of, we've just done an episode on Art Nouveau, this kind of new art, a strip back to nature and a vibrant city would have been, and a free city would have been something that really appealed to Lempicka, to Tamara. But for Lempicki, her husband, it was a huge shift for him to kind of come into this new city, somewhere that he is not used to, but also that he doesn't understand the lifestyle. So where he actually dwindled, Tamara actually really started to flourish. And Tamara, of course, also had her sister who was in the city of Paris. It was one of the reasons why they chose to go to Paris in particular. And her sister was quite a celebrated architect. So this was also a catalyst in kind of pushing her towards becoming a career woman herself. And she began then to focus on removing herself from the clutches of having to depend on anybody for money. She wanted to be able to provide for herself. So this is when she really kind of threw herself into her artwork. As her sister also said to her, remember, you were an amazing artist. Focus on your artwork and see where it can take you. And she pretty quickly started to enjoy her life in Paris. She did have a daughter with Lempicka. Cosette is her daughter's name. But besides a lot of portraiture that she did of her daughter, the relationship with her daughter wasn't very close. She rarely saw her. And she kind of got this reputation for a champagne swilling bohemian. And this is where her story kind of takes hold. She understands the circles in which artwork is appreciated, and she then injects herself into those circles with her mysterious attitude, and she understood how to entice patrons. She would use a public image to entice them through jewellery, through fashion. She always got designers such as Chanel would send her their clothes because they saw her as a walking advertisement for their wares, knowing that if people saw her wearing their wares, that they would then go out and buy them. And so this kind of reputation really began to take hold in Paris. And by the 1920s, she had become an extreme and celebrated socialite in her own right in Paris. So I'm quickly going to talk about her artwork. And in particular, this is where we can see her differences, Tamara's differences to any other female artist of the early 20th century. She is not afraid to express sexuality, in particular the new aged woman. Her artwork is like an ode to the modern woman. And I think when we look at her pieces, she is probably the only artist who has ever really taken the essence of the Art Deco period and actually put it on canvas. So, you know, during the Art Deco period, this kind of, I would say, this enticing industrial revolution that is the machine world takes over artwork. It takes over architecture. We see product styling is also involved in this. And then it goes into fashion and jewelry. But even the art movements of Cubism don't really capture the Art Deco period or the machine world in its true essence. It's more stylistic. Whereas when we look at Tamara Lempicka's work, it's almost as if her portraits are coming out of the actual picture frame to life, but in a very different way to any other artist. She actually gets a name for herself. She added the De Lempicka to kind of show that she was an aristocrat. So Tamara de Lempicka is what she kind of became known as in the social circles. She painted the new woman of the 1920s, particularly with style and sexuality. The focus on sexuality was intense. And if you do have the chance to go and see the Broadway show, it does go into her relationships, especially in the bohemian clubs of Paris at the time. She's known to have been in the circles of those who like to dabble or play both sides. In particular, she was known as being bisexual. And the models that she used, one in particular, Raffaella, in her paintings were known as good time girls or sex workers. But the paintings and portraiture that she does of them, particularly nudes and full body on canvas, is extremely beautiful and bewildering, as it's very kind of goes into the surrealism of the time, but also captures something that we don't really see in artwork today. And of course, because it's mirroring the time that it's from, she was able to use the mannerism that she saw in the art movement of the 16th century to bring about shading in an angular way that is very Art Deco, but also soft, which was very difficult to accomplish. And this is why even today she's quite celebrated. However, one of even though the 20th century femme is what she is very well known for, her self-portrait that she created in 1929 is perhaps one of her most famous paintings. And this particular self-portrait, she's in a green Bugatti, which she never owned, but she's sitting in the driver's seat, which I think automatically shows what kind of woman she was and how she perceived herself as somebody who was taking charge of her own life. And in this particular portrait, she's leaning back. She has smooth and sleek profile with very mysterious half-closed eyes. The green Bugatti is shown unmistakably, and she has her driving gloves on and a scarf is flowing from her neck. This particular piece is perhaps one of her most thrilling, and also I think captures the industrial marvels of the machine age with the 20th century femme and how she viewed herself. So it's a beautiful full circle specifically of this artist, and perhaps one of the greatest pieces of artwork that she ever created. Now, not all stories have a happy ending, and I'm not saying that Tamara Lempicka's ending is a sad one, because I believe that every story has parts to it that are celebrated and parts that are hidden. So we never truly know what the peak or pit of somebody's story is. They can only answer that for themselves. But this particular woman was formidable. And we know that she lived through the Russian Revolution. We know that she lived through World War I. We know that she lived through World War II. During World War II, or just before the outbreak of World War II, she could see that things were not going great in Europe, and she left after divorcing her first husband. She left for the United States. And during the 20s and 30s, she was extremely celebrated in Parisian circles, and her artwork, it's said that to have your portrait done by her at the time would be around 500,000 euros today, back then. So it was in francs. So the fact that she was able to reach the point that she really wanted, which was to be able to provide for herself and not have to rely on anybody, especially a man, for money, this was her dream. And she was able to achieve that in Paris, and then she had to leave it behind for a new world. So this is when she moved to the United States. Now, we know that by the time that she had reached the United States, there, had been also the Great Depression, and she had just arrived as World War II was breaking out. And there was no longer this craving for Art Deco. It had, at this stage, by the time she had reached the United States, it had gone out of fashion. And so she tried to, again, open up her artistry for commissions, but found that there was no demand, that there was no more big houses to display amazing pieces of artwork. And there was just not this craving for the decadent richness that her artwork provided. And so she fell into oblivion, I would say, at this particular stage. She then tried again to revive her artistry in other ways on the canvas in different styles in the 1960s, to not much success. And then in the 1970s, we see her artwork then come to the forefront again as something to be celebrated. So it was nice that before her death in the 1980s in Mexico, that she was able to hear of her artwork bringing joy once more. But what I'd really like to focus on lastly in this episode of Tamara de Lempicka is she was known for enjoying all the things of the Art Deco period. And that was not limited to fashion that you wore, but also jewels that glittered and accessorized those outfits. Many of her portraits will have gorgeous pieces of jewelry that are also present. And much like her artwork and the pieces that we view in Lempicka's collection of art, her private collection of jewels were quintessential Art Deco. And when I was in New York recently with Darcy, we were able to view some of her pieces in an exhibit that Sotheby's were doing. During this particular exhibit, there were pieces of her artwork alongside pieces from her private collection of her jewels. And it was just so interesting to see how her art mirrored the style of the jewelry, and it really brought everything to life. So I'm going to quickly put you onto some of the jewelry pieces that we viewed whilst we were in New York. So we have arrived at Sotheby's New York to look at the exhibit that's happening here, The World of Tamara, a celebration of Lempicka and Art Deco. And of course, Darcy and I beelined it for the jewellery cabinets, which have not disappointed. They are full of jewels which are very typical of the Art Deco period, quintessential, I would say, but also show such an incredible portrait of one of the most prestigious Art Deco artists of all time, Tamara Lempicka. As many of our listeners will know, I am an avid supporter and lover of Susan Belperon, and incredibly inside Tamara's collection we have an amazing Art Deco bracelet, which was actually designed by Susan Belperon while she was working for Broadway. And this particular piece is panels which are made up of these steps, carved stepped rock crystal, which are to the center, and on either side we have pyramids of hematite. Now, We've got a picture of this in the show notes, and of course we'll be showing you on Instagram this particular piece. It is outstandingly beautiful, unique but classic at the same time. The spikes and the steps mixed together in these particular motifs add something so angular to the piece, and of course is recognizable automatically as an Art Deco piece of jewellery. I think it's important to mention as well, when we're looking at the Art Deco period, for those who are looking to collect, I wouldn't say to you straight away that you always have to focus on finding something that is named. And I think this particular collection, her Lempicka's personal collection, shows that yes, she did champion signed pieces by the most famous jewellery houses of the Art Deco period, especially the 1930s. However, she has a lot of pieces as well which are extremely recognizable as Art Deco pieces but are unsigned. And two of those in particular are brooches. One has two incredibly matched Colombian emeralds on either side of a square Asher cut diamond to the center. All open work surrounding, but really the piercing color of the emerald is what steals the show in this particular piece. And it is not signed, so it's something to really kind of keep in your mind when you're looking at pieces of jewelry. Don't always get caught up on the signature. The piece can be just as beautiful and valuable without that sign, that signature. I will mention that as we were in New York, I was able to talk to the Sotheby's representatives to ask them a little bit more about her Lempicka's personal collection. Number one, what the provenance was, but also what was known about where and who gave these pieces to Lempicka, or of course, whether or not she purchased them herself. And although it's not exciting to admit, not much was known about where they came from. It did give us a really unique glimpse into her style, but also it did make me think back to the way in which Tamara actually conducted herself. And it would not have surprised me, number one, if they had been gifts that were given by these jewelry firms or things that she had purchased for herself when a large commission had been fulfilled to kind of reward herself as a reward, you know, as a job well done. And I really love the thought of her doing that. An Art Deco collection would not be complete without calibre cuts, and in particular bomb rings or tank rings. And two feature in this collection. One, which is by Van Cleef & Arpels, has panels of baguette cut diamonds, calibre cut rubies, and of course a very large diamond to the center of a platinum ring. All angular, and something that you expect to see in a tank ring from the 1930s. We also have an original Bourvon ring. Now this has 3 panels of diamonds to the center with those concentric shoulders going down the side to a very, very broad ring. Again, it's super recognizable as a Bourvon piece. And dare I say, Susan Belperon may have had her hand in it as well. But the design is quintessential for the period, and definitely something that we would expect to see a trailblazer of the Art Deco movement to be wearing. Housed in the same cabinet, we have Jean Dunard. This particular piece is made out of lacquer and almost has a tribal look to it. The actual colors are something that you would usually see in the Art Deco period, but using materials like coral and onyx.
you can see as well from the actual piece that there's actual evidence of where it's been worn. And so it's really nice. I love to see pieces like this showing evidence of actually enjoyment in wearing. And in person, we must have had a very, very small neck and wrist to wear this particular piece.
With pieces from some of the most celebrated jewellery firms and designers of the Art Deco period, every piece, every glittering trinket that we saw within the cabinets of her collection was not only gorgeously attractive, they were exemplifying the time period that she came from, and also really capturing for us her personal style. And it was so incredible to be able to piece them together with the artwork, her self-portrait on display. And of course, there was a Bugatti right in the middle of the showroom just to finish it all off. She was known as the Baroness with a brush, and looking around the showroom, it was easy to see why. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, I have notes on what we've spoken about today with links and everything else you might need in the description area of this podcast. Matthew and I will be back next week with another magical and mysterious pursuit through the world of antique and vintage jewelry. As always, thanks to our podcast producer, dustpod.io. And until next time, from me, Alyce Catcher, chat to you soon.